getting close to being near the end of the reading cycle for the year, right? Not going to be much longer. And with this one, chapter 1 through chapter 3, most of 3, one of the important lessons that we need to get out of this, that our world is forgetting about, is that rebellion does not equal rejection. Having a lot of people misunderstand what that means. Moses opens up Deuteronomy with what is a long history lesson that fulfills this entire portion, and some of the next is it's recapping all of the time that this people have had and experienced after their redemption from Egypt. Well, verse 1, he says, these are the words. That's what Devarim means, Deuteronomy. These are the words that Moses spoke to all Israel across the Jordan in the wilderness, in the Arba, opposite Suf, between Paran and Tophel, Laban, Hazareth, and Dizahab. Now Moses spoke to Bnei Israel according to all Adonai had commanded him for them in the 40th year, in the 11th month, on the first day of the month. So it's been 40 years since they left Egypt, and it's been actually near the tail end of that one, the 11th month of all of that. And he reminds this surviving generation all that they have gone through, and how Adonai has been with them, how he has blessed them every step of the way. Verse 10 says, Adonai your God has multiplied you. This is what he has done. This is what he has accomplished in this 40 years that you've left Egypt. He has multiplied you, and here you are today like the stars of the heavens in number. Going through all of those experiences, you would think that they would have just been significantly reduced, that they would have had more people die than live, but instead he has multiplied them. He says in verse 11, may Adonai, God of your fathers, increase you 1,000 times as many as you are, and may he bless you just as he has promised you. Now, he has already done great things in them. He has grown them. He's increased their numbers in less than ideal situations. But Moses wants to see God do even more. He wants to see God's blessing go further, 1,000 times more than he already has. And what's always fun, and once again, the Aramaic reveals, that in first century Jewish thought, they saw little to no difference between the actions of Adonai. Adonai, your God, has multiplied you. And what we've been looking at in the last 2 years now, just about, looking through Isaiah, looking at the Aramaic and all of that, about the Memra, the word, about who is responsible for this increase in verse 10. Here he says, Adonai, your God, has multiplied you. But in the Aramaic, it says, the word, the Memra of the Lord, our God, hath multiplied you. And behold, you are today as the stars of heaven for multitude. There's little to no difference between the actions of Adonai and the Memra. They are equal to each other. Adonai, in all his goodness, has done wonderful things for them. From the very beginning, Adonai has been fighting for them. He has been carrying them. He's been providing for them. He has been with them every step of the way. Verse 30 says, Adonai, your God, who goes before you, he himself will fight for you. We read this a little while ago. Just as he did for you in Egypt, before your own eyes, and in the wilderness where you saw how Adonai, your God, carried you as a man carries his son everywhere you went until you came to this place. Now, those of you with young children know what that's like, right? When they're little and you're walking around at the park or the amusement park, and they start, after wanting to run and jump and do all the crazy things that they want to do, in about 3.5 minutes they're ready to be done, right? And then they want you to carry them the rest of the day, right? Anybody else experience that? Still do? What? Tough it up, kid. But yeah, there's that point where they're tired and they don't want to go on, and they're just gonna, oh, I don't want to walk anymore. Nobody else did that, right? I know I never did anything like that. I'm sure. I have no memory of such things. But he picks them up. He carries them. That's what a loving father does. He picks them up and he carries them everywhere that they went. He carried them as a man carries his son until you came to this place. And once again, it is the memory, it's the word that is acting on earth. As God is enthroned in the heavens, it's the memory that is here doing all of that. It's the word, it's the memory of the Lord your God, who goeth before you and will himself fight for you according to all that he did for you in Mitzrayim, in Egypt, before your eyes. And the way he phrases it in all of this, not a day went by in the entirety of the 40 years since leaving Egypt that he has not been with them, that he has not been showing them the way, showing them a light on their path. Verse 33 says, the one who goes before you on the way to scout out a place for you to camp and to show you the way you should go, in fire by night and in cloud by day. But not a day in those 40 years, no matter how it might have felt, no matter how tired you may have been, no matter what's been going on, he was with you every day. There was not one day where he took a vacation and dropped you off somewhere and let you go it on your own. And that is important for us to always keep in mind. Our feelings do not determine his presence. Y'all realize that, right? Our feelings do not determine his presence. And this recap from Moses, it's actually kind of a blueprint for something that we see in the book of Acts. And it comes from Stephen in chapter 7. The first one who was killed for believing Yeshua is the Messiah. Because he goes through a time before he is killed where he also recounts Israel's history. And he goes back and he starts with Abraham, and describes them going down into Egypt for 400 years, right? 400 is just 40 with an extra zero. Keep that in mind. Because he recounts all the promise of the land, of the descendants he goes through the covenant of circumcision, that salvation that went through Joseph. He emphasizes that number 40, where he talks about how Moses was 40 years old when he left Egypt. It was another 40 years before he came back. Right? Because when he was approaching 40 years of age, it came into his heart to visit his brothers, B'nai Israel. That's when he first went out to go see those that he was connected with but wasn't raised with. Verse 30 says, when 40 years had passed, this is after he had fled from Egypt, after he had tried to deliver them his way. This 40 years had passed, an angel appeared to him in the wilderness of Mount Sinai in the flame of the burning bush. Right, so he's bringing up that number multiple times. Stephen mentioned it again, 40 years again, when referring to Israel's wilderness experience. In Acts chapter 7, verse 36, says, this man led them out, performing wonders and signs in the land of Egypt, and at the Red Sea, and in the wilderness, for how many years? 40. This is the Moses who said to B'nai Israel, God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among your brothers. This is the one who was in the community in the wilderness with the angel who spoke to him on Mount Sinai and with our fathers. He received living words to pass on to us. Now that was an important passage. I brought this one up before. Verse 38, this is the one who was in the community in the wilderness. Y'all need to underline that word if you haven't already. Right? Because that one's important. Because it's in the Septuagint, in the Greek translation of this text, or of the Old Testament. No, it's actually in the Greek, it's ecclesia. This is the one who was in, if you've got your King James with you, it says this was the one who was in the church in the wilderness. The church is the people of God. The church is Israel. And that's an important thing to keep in mind with all of this. But Stephen, he spends a lot of time on Moses before quickly going through mentioning Joshua and the victories that he experienced, David and his kingship and the building of the temple by Solomon. Right? He spends most of his time talking about this time. And Moses confirmed all this himself in his own history in Deuteronomy chapter 2. He says, "For Adonai your God has blessed you in all the work of your hand. He has known your wanderings through this great wilderness. These 40 years Adonai your God has been with you, and you have lacked nothing." So they're reiterating this emphasis on this 40 years thing. That 40 represents this time of testing, this spiritual growth or change. The 40 is a time of transition or even renewal. And so that number came to mean those things in years later. You know, how many days was Yeshua taken out into the wilderness by the Spirit of God to be tested by who? The enemy, right? By the devil for how many days? 40 days. It's a time of testing. Well, you won't believe, maybe you won't be too surprised, who the Aramaic says is involved in this whole process of growing them, leading them, helping them as a good shepherd to become this great nation. In the Aramaic, he says it like this. It says, "For the Lord your God hath blessed you in all the works of your hands. He hath supplied your wants in thy journeying in the great wilderness. These 40 years hath the word of the Lord, hath the memra of the Lord," this representation of the word which came to be associated with Messiah. The word, the Messiah of the Lord your God has been your helper. You have not wanted anything. You know, when Yeshua talks about sending another counselor to them, another helper to them, why would he say another? Because he is also their helper. Right? That's what this is coming to. In all of these histories, God has been faithful to them. He has been good to them all along the way. You know, the Memra is their good shepherd. He has provided for them. He has been your helper. They have no reason to not to trust him. They have no reason to reject him. They have no reason to rebel. And yet, what does the history say over and over and over again? They do so repeatedly, despite all the good things that he has done. Chapter 1, verse 25 says, "They took in their hands some of the fruit of the land and brought it to us." This is the 12 spies as they go out, the 10 that come back. They also brought back word to us and said, "Good is the land that Adonai our God is giving to us. Yet you would not go up, but rebelled against the command of Adonai your God." Those 10 swayed the opinion of the entire people. He says, "In your tents you grumbled and said," and listen to how they characterize the good things that he has done for them. "Because Adonai hates us. He has brought us out from the land of Egypt to hand us over to the Amorites to destroy us." You know, if he really loved us, he would have just left us there in Egypt. Now, does that make sense anywhere? He would have left us in our slavery. He would have left us in our sin. He would not have redeemed us if he really loved us. But it's because he hates us that he did this. You're looking back at verse 31 again, that part of that. Again, the good things. You saw how Adonai your God carried you as a man carries his son everywhere you went until you came to this place. Yet, for all of this, you did not trust in Adonai your God. They had all these good things that he's been doing for them. They had no reason not to trust him. But they're rebelling against him. They are not trusting him. Once again, the Targum, the Aramaic, reveals that this generation that went through all of this did not have the same kind of faith that Abraham had. Because Abraham, you'll remember from Genesis 15, he believed the promises that were coming. He believed the promise about the land and the descendants, those future things that were coming. He was given, this vision of the kingdom of Messiah in the Memra. That's who Abraham believed, according to the Aramaic, according to the Targum. He had faith in Adonai. He had faith in the Memra, in the Word, in the Messiah, as it shows in chapter 15. It says Abraham, believed in the Lord, believed Adonai, and had faith in the Word, in the Memra of the Lord, and he reckoned it to him for righteousness. He had faith in that future promise, in that future provision, in that future even rescue out of not just Egypt, but also of sin and death. He believed in everything that God was going to provide for their redemption. But Moses' generation was rebelling against this. And rebelling not just against Adonai, but against the Memra. 126 says, you were not willing to go up, talking about when the spies came back with their report, but you believed the words of the 10 wicked ones and rebelled against the word, against the Memra of the Lord your God. They were rebelling against their good shepherd. Verse 32, in this thing you believed not in the word of the Lord your God. You believe not in the Memra. You believe not in the Messiah of the Lord your God. They were a generation that was rejecting God's goodness and provision and promise, which meant rejecting him and his ultimate provision, Messiah. Have y'all known people that have been like that? You can see, you've seen evidence of God doing so many great things in their life over and over and over again. He helps them. He bails them out. He provides for them. They're blessed and all these kind of things, and yet they refuse to really follow him. They refuse to really believe him, in spite of all the good things that he has done for them, protecting them, healing them, saving them. They believe not in the word. And that generation spent those 40 years, dying in the wilderness. This entire generation had to die off before they could move into the kingdom, because rebellion against the word, rebellion against the Memra, against Messiah, has consequences. Rejection of the Memra has consequences. Rejection of Messiah has consequences. Moses mentioned in chapter 1, verse 45, that Adonai even stopped listening to their voices that were crying out to him. Isaiah says, as we were reading some of that, he says about the consequences of their rebellion from the passage we were reading earlier, consequences that appear in all the different generations in some form or another, that every generation that rebels against him. But in Isaiah chapter 1, verse 2, from the Haftorah portion we were reading, it says, listen, heavens, and hear, O earth, for Adonai has spoken. Sons I have raised and brought up, but they have rebelled against me. This is talking about Judah and Israel, the two kingdoms. The ox knows its owner, and the donkey its manager. But Israel does not know. My people do not understand. even an ox and a donkey knows who's in charge, right? Even they know who's got the reins and who's supposed to be directing things. They know, the ox and the donkey know that when he says to go, we're supposed to go. What he says to do, we're supposed to do. The ox and the donkey can figure that out. But Israel doesn't. Has not been able to figure that out. He says, "Oi, a sinful nation, a people weighed down with iniquity, offspring of evildoers, sons dealing corruptly. They have abandoned Adonai. They have despised Israel's Holy One. They have turned backwards." Now, is he holding back? Is Isaiah holding back on his description? Is he being nice? No. He's not hiding anything about what's wrong with this situation. And there are consequences for this attitude, this opinion, this behavior. We're missing verse 7. It says, "Your land is desolate, your cities are burned with fire, your fields strangers devour it in your presence." It's a desolation overthrown by strangers. So in this state of rebellion and corruption, Isaiah let his readers know that even their attempts at worship he's not accepting that. They were not pleasing to him. They were not, even though they were keeping the feast days, even though they were doing the appointed times like Shabbat and all of that, it still was, because of their rebellion, it was corrupt. He says, "For what is it to me, the multitude of your sacrifices," says Adonai. "I am full of burnt offerings of rams and fat of fed animals. I have no delight in the blood of bulls or the lambs or the he-goats." Now, where is that taking place, all that stuff? In what city? In Jerusalem. Where in Jerusalem? At the temple. Right? When you come to appear before me, and where does that happen? At the temple, right? "Who has required this at your hand, the trampling of my courts?" He says, "Bring no more worthless offerings. Incense is an abomination to me. The new moon and Shabbat, the calling of convocation, I cannot endure it. Iniquity with this solemn assembly." Again, is he playing around? Is he holding things back? Is he trying to downplay it and not make it a big deal? No, he's laying it out there for all the people to see and hear, all the world to this day to see and hear. It goes on. It says, "Your new moons and your festivals my soul hates," because they're mixing this iniquity with all of these things. "They are a burden to me, and I am weary to bear them. When you spread out your hands, I will hide my eyes from you. When you multiply prayers, I will not hear, for your hands are full of blood." That's kind of the opposite of what is the priestly blessing, right? The Lord bless you and do what? And keep you, guard you, make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face, his countenance toward you. What's he saying here? Like, I'm gonna put my hands over my face, because have you heard a parent or somebody say, "I can't even look at you right now"? Right? When somebody says that, what are they expressing? I'm so mad at you. If I start talking, you might not live. Right? That's what he's saying. In this state of rebellion and corruption, Isaiah is letting his readers know that all of that stuff is not pleasing to him. All these activities centered around the temple offended him because of the hypocrisy, because of the corruption, because of the rebellion. And it's because of, as Isaiah puts it in the Aramaic, the rejection of the Memra. In verse 2, in the Targum, it says, "Hear, O heavens, which trembled when I gave my law to my people. And give ear, O earth, which was agitated on account of my words, for the Lord has spoken. My people, the house of Israel, whom I called sons, I loved them, I made them glorious. I've done all these good things for them, but they have rebelled against my word, against the memory. So it was true back in Moses' day that they were rebelling against the memra of God. Is it also true in Isaiah's day? Is it continuing? Yeah. It hasn't changed. It hasn't changed because we haven't changed. People haven't changed. So it's no surprise that it happened again when Yeshua came unto his own, yet his own did not receive him. Right? That's the pattern in the scriptures of rebellion. Yeshua predicted also that there would be consequences. And one of those consequences is what is recognized starting today after sunset. Mark 13, he says, as Yeshua was going out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, Teacher, look, what stones and what buildings. And Yeshua said to him, You see these great buildings, not one stone here will be left upon another. Every one will be torn down. Or similarly in Luke 19, says, as he drew near and saw Jerusalem, he wept over her, saying, If only you had recognized this day the things that lead to shalom, that lead to peace. But now they are hidden from your eyes. For the days will come upon you when your enemies will surround you with barricades and hem you in on all sides, and they will smash you to the ground, and you and your children within you, and they won't leave within you one stone upon another, because you did not recognize the time of your visitation. The reason all that stuff happened to Jerusalem, the reason all that stuff happened to the temple in its destruction happened because they were rebelling against the Word. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. The Word was God, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. All that stuff happened because they rebelled against the Word. They did not recognize the time of his coming, of his visitation. That all of that happened, the destruction of the second temple in 70 AD by the Romans, and it was almost about how long was it after his death, burial, and resurrection? About 40 years. Huh. I wonder what that means. Actually, I'm still kind of trying to figure that out, because it's one of those that cannot be an accident. Of about 40 years after he said it is when the temple was destroyed. Josephus, the Jewish historian of the era, described the events like this. It says, Now as soon as the army had no more people to slay, no more people to kill or plunder, because there remained none to be the objects of their fury, Titus Caesar gave orders that they should now demolish the entire city and the temple. He says, It was so thoroughly laid even with the ground by those that dug it up to the foundation, that there was left nothing to make those that came thither believe Jerusalem had ever been inhabited. So did Rome do a good job of demolition? No stone was left upon another. The destruction of the temple on Tish B'Av, the 9th of Av, was a consequence of rejecting the memory of the word of Messiah. And it is a terrible and tragic thing. That is what, the Jewish people around the world, that's why they fast, why they mourn. And it's not just to be sad about past events. I kind of mentioned this earlier, but it's also in anticipation of their mourning turning to joy and celebration and dancing. That it's not going to be a source of sadness and grief forever. That's God's promise of restoration, that his promise of restoration still stands, because rebellion does not equal rejection. That's why the Amidah, the standing prayers, include the prayer for the restoration of Jerusalem and the temple service. We do some of those. For rebuilding Jerusalem, it says, "Return in compassion to your city, Jerusalem, and rest within it, as you have said. Rebuild it speedily, and in our days a structure forever." One that's not going to be destroyed. He says, "And may you establish the throne of David within Jerusalem speedily. And blessed are you, O Lord, the builder of Jerusalem." As Hebrews also puts it, if I'm remembering it correctly, they are waiting for a city whose builder, I'm missing a word in there, architect and builder is God, builder and maker. Yeah. So even Hebrews has a same hope of all of that. The temple service prayer goes like this, and we know this one. "Show favor, Adonai our God, to your people Israel in their prayer, and return the service to the Holy of Holies of your temple." Because it's not there now. But Tish B'Av, the fasting on the 9th of Av, they want it to come back. "The fire offerings of Israel and their prayer accept with love and favor, and may the service of your people Israel be eternally favorable to you, and may our eyes behold your return to Zion in compassion. Blessed are you, Adonai, who restores his presence to Zion." There's a growing camp among the traditional church, among Christianity. You're seeing this turning against Israel and her people, and it's for all those that are in different camps, of Reformed camp, amillennial, postmillennial, all these different theological positions, preterism, things like that, that say that, well, at 70 AD, that event that Yeshua foretold, the destruction of the temple, they talk about that like it was a good thing. That meant that God was done with those people that are constantly in rebellion. That meant an end for the Jewish people as God's chosen. It meant the end of Judaism, the end of the faith of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Moses, and all the prophets. That this new faith in Messiah has now replaced all of that. That language is increasing out there, if you haven't been listening to it. And they practically celebrate the destruction of the temple. And if you do that, if you're wanting to do that, celebrating the destruction of the temple, you're celebrating with those who committed the destruction of the temple. You realize that. Not just the Babylonians and the Romans, by the way. You're celebrating with those who want nothing more than to end the faith and practice and the people of the Scriptures. And who ultimately wants to do that? The one who wants to steal, kill, and destroy, and hunt down, as Revelation talks about, the woman who gives birth to the Messiah. He is continuing to this day to try to wipe them out. And those doing this are celebrating God not keeping his promise. Those doing this are just like those who, when they tried to trap Yeshua in a question about marriage and the resurrection, to these proponents of that attitude, he'll say the same thing. You have gone astray because you don't understand the Scriptures or the power of God. Those who make 70 AD and the destruction of the temple the be-all, end-all of the Jewish people in God's plan and purposes do not understand the Scriptures or the power of God. They do not understand this repeated pattern of rebellion, discipline, and restoration. They don't understand that, even what happened in Yeshua's day, that was not the first time that had happened. Things like that. And it didn't end them at the time. The pattern and example in the truth of the Scriptures, what we've already looked at, does not hide the failing of the Jewish people to live up to their calling, does it? It doesn't minimize that. It doesn't pretend that everything, no, they're perfect. It doesn't hide their rebellion or their lack of faith or their rejection or their corruption of the temple. The point, as Isaiah said, when he gets there and he says that he takes no delight in their offerings, that he cannot endure the Moedim, the feast days. He hates the hypocrisy. That's been happening all along. Even through the destruction of the temple the first time in 586 BC by the Babylonians. Right? And yet, even though the temple had already been destroyed, did that mean he was done with them? No. The pattern was that he brought them back. Right? Stephen again talks about this reality of their situation. He says, "Oh, you stiff-necked people, you uncircumcised of heart and ears, you always resist the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, just as your fathers did, you do as well." So you're continuing the same pattern. Which of the prophets did your fathers not persecute? They killed the ones who foretold the coming of the righteous one, and now you have become his betrayers and murderers. You who received the Torah by direction of angels and did not keep it. Is he hiding the failure? No. How did they respond to him when he went to Stephen when he called them out on that history? They killed him. And yet, the reality is that none of that has ever caused God to reject them. Never caused Adonai to break his promise. Because rebellion does not equal rejection. As Paul said in Romans 11, verse 1, where Paul asked that exact question, God has not rejected his people, has he? And what's the answer? May it never be. Those that claim that God is done with them, that 70 AD just basically turned them off, they don't understand the Scriptures or the power of God. They are missing something important. As Isaiah goes on to say in the Targum, they're saying something, because in saying that God is throwing them away, they're actually saying something about God, about Adonai. Isaiah 1 verse 9 in the Targums puts it like this. It says, "Except the exceeding goodness of the Lord of hosts had caused to remain unto us in his mercy a deliverance. We had sins on account of which we certainly had perished, as the men of Sodom and as the inhabitants of Gomorrah we would have been consumed." Right? So what's he saying? Because of our sin, we should have been treated just like Sodom and Gomorrah, right? What prevented that from happening and being treated just like that? It was the goodness of the Lord of hosts. It was his mercy in his deliverance that caused him to treat them differently. Except for the goodness of God, they would have been judged and done away with. Except for the promise of God, except for the covenants of God, except for the covenants he made, the oath that he swore, by whose name? According to Hebrews, he swore by himself. He swore by his own name. And so when you understand the pattern and the example of the Scriptures, when you understand the power and the name of God, you know that his goodness and his mercy always calls his people to repentance. He always calls his people, and he gives them time to return to his Torah and to his ways, to the law and to the memra, to the word. Isaiah 16 in the Aramaic puts it like this: return to the law, return to his commandments, return to the Torah, right? Make you clean from your sins, put away the evil of your doings from before the presence of my word. Cease to do evil, learn to do well, seek judgment, judge ye justice for him who is suffering violence, do justice to the orphan, hear ye the cry of the widow. And then, when you return to the law, to the Torah, you shall pray before me, and I will grant your petition. So he's going to start listening to you again. Though your sins be stained with dye, your sins, they shall be white as snow. Though they be red like crimson, they shall be as pure as wool. We were reading that earlier, weren't we? His goodness and his mercy will not allow him to throw away every promise he's made. He provides restoration and forgiveness over and over and over again. He does, and you'd better be hoping that he does that for them, because he does that for me as a believer, doesn't he? Doesn't he do that for you? Over and over again, he forgives. Over and over and over again, he calls us to repent and return. And if he were to get fed up with the Jewish people, like is being talked about, and reject them for their rebellion and say that I am done with them and that I'm not going to give them a chance to come back, what do you think? What makes you think that he won't do that with you? Right? If he can do that to them and break his promise and break his covenants, then there's nothing keeping him from doing that to any of us. That makes sense? If he can do that and break his promise, and he can break what we like to call, or what we grew up calling, the old covenant, right? If he can break the old covenant, then there's nothing to stop him from breaking the new, is there? See, this statement from Isaiah in the Targum about returning to the Torah and to the word, the memra, it reminds me a lot of what John says in Revelation about those who survive and persevere, who overcome by the blood of the Lamb. Y'all remember? Oh, I forgot this verse. If you be willing and obedient to my memra, my word, you shall eat the good of the land. But Revelation 14, he says, here is the perseverance of the saints, of the Kedoshim, those who keep the commandments of God, right? They have returned to the law, they have returned to the Torah, and the faith of Yeshua, of the word, of the memra. In those last days, as God's people, both Jew and Gentile, by faith in Yeshua, and who keep his commandments, they will see the restoration of the temple. They will see the restoration of the temple service, just as the Jewish people have been hoping and praying for so long for, right? Just as those in the wilderness came back, to the border of the promised land and needed to cross over into it. By Yeshua's words, the Jewish people must be present in Jerusalem. The leadership must be in place at the temple, and the temple must be up and functioning. Isaiah, this is the passage I was wanting to put back in there, where he says in Isaiah chapter 1, I will restore your judges as at first, your counselors as at the start, and afterward you will be called a city of righteousness and the faithful city. This is chapter 1, verse 26. It says, Zion will be redeemed with justice, her repentant with righteousness. Right? By Yeshua's own words, the Jewish people must be present in Jerusalem. The leadership must be in place. The temple must be functioning. because he says that they are going to see him again. Even in his day, when they rejected him, when they rebelled against him, he says that you're going to see me again, but only in those conditions for which they rejected him. Right? Despite their rejection and rebellion against the word, the goodness of God still reaches out to them and will continue to do so into the day of his appearing. Remember Matthew 23, he says, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who kills the prophets and stones those sent to her," not hiding any of that, of the failure, of the rebellion, of the sin in their lives, in the sin in our lives. "How often I long to gather your children together." See, even though they did all of that, even though they rebelled against him, they still had not rejected. He still had not rejected them. He still loved them. "How often I long to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing." And here's the consequence. "Look, your house is left to you desolate. For I tell you, you will never see me again until you say, Baruch haba b'shem Adonai, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." See, if those people were right who said that 70 AD cut everything off for the Jewish people, that 70 AD and the destruction of the temple meant that Judaism was forever done and you'll never see it again, then if that was true, then that phrase should end, "You will never see me again." That's where it should end if those people who say that stuff are right. You will never see me again. But they don't understand the scriptures or the power of God. Because that's not how it ends. There's a very important word that comes after that one. Anybody know what it is? Until. Until is a very important word, which means at some point in the future, now it doesn't say when, he will come back to those who rejected him, and they will say what? "Blessed is he who comes in the name of Adonai." That "until" means that is going to happen. The people, the leadership, the temple must be there for that, because Yeshua the Messiah, the Memra, the Word, is going to be welcomed by that leadership who now recognize him for who he is. They'll look upon him whom they have pierced, and even though it will be mourning, it will be turned into what? Joy. And he will take his rightful place on the throne of David. And then the promise of comfort, the promise of peace. We pray for the peace of Jerusalem, for that literal earthly Jerusalem that Isaiah promised about, when all her enemies are defeated, with only with Messiah on the throne. That happens. That's when the peace truly comes, right? "Says, therefore saith the Lord of the world, the Lord of hosts, the mighty one of Israel, the city of Jerusalem, I will comfort her." She will receive that comfort when Messiah is there. "But woe to the wicked who continue to rebel against the Memra, against the word. Woe to the wicked when I shall reveal myself to render just recompense to the enemies of my people and render vengeance to my enemies." That's when the comfort comes. And the temple is essential for that to be there, for all of that to happen. Because right at the start of Isaiah chapter 2, guess what happens? "And it shall come to pass in the end of days, in the last days, that the mountain of the house of the sanctuary of the Lord shall be established in the top of the mountains, and it shall be exalted above the hills, and all the kingdoms shall be turned to worship upon it." The mountain is where Jerusalem is built, right? The sanctuary of the Lord, what is that referring to? The mountain of Adonai's house is how this translation puts it. Shall be established in the top of the mountains, and it shall be exalted above the hills, and all the kingdoms shall be turned to worship upon it. Because then many people shall go and say, Come ye, and let us go up to the mountain of the house of the sanctuary of the Lord, to the house of the Shekinah, the glory of the God of Jacob. Where are they going in the end of days? They're going to Jerusalem. They're going into the temple. If you believe in the second coming of Messiah, the end of days, then those things had better be there. They're going to be there. But if you think the temple is done away with, if you think the Jewish people and all that stuff of Judaism is done and over, then you're not really looking forward to this. He will teach us his ways, which is what? His Torah, which are right before him, and we will walk in the instruction of his law. For out of Zion shall go forth the Torah, the law, and the instruction of the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. So with all of that, with what's coming at sundown, we mourn for the loss, for the missed opportunity, for the rejection of Messiah, because the time of his visitation was not recognized. But also in this, let us also rejoice, for it will not remain that way forever, until the temple will be restored with true worship, and with the King Messiah Yeshua recognized and sitting on the throne of Jerusalem. And as Paul talks about in Romans, he says, and then, when the fullness of the Gentiles has come in, and then what happens with all of Israel? All of Israel will be saved. That's what we're hoping for. That's what we're anticipating. That's what we're looking forward to, is when that time of mourning is turned into dancing.